Good evening, everyone. My name is Shramana Biswas, and I welcome you all to this panel discussion on cultural identity and ideology, curated under TMYS review in association with Oxford University Press. Under this theme, TMYS Review December 2022 will explore the role of artistic endeavors of society in shaping cultural ideology and identity. I would also like to say that we are calling for submission of stories, essays, and poems. And for project architecture and submission guidelines, please visit www.tellmeyourstory.biz. Today's topic of discussion is sitcoms and OTTs, visual manifestations of culture. We are honored to have with us Dr. Sreya Mitra, Professor Debanjali Roy, and Professor Aritra Basu as our esteemed speakers. Thank you so much for joining us. I shall now quickly introduce our speakers. Shreya Mitra is an assistant professor at the Department of Mass Communication at the American University of Sharjah, UAE. Her research focuses on South Asian media, popular culture, stardom and celebrity culture, fandom studies, gender, globalization, and culture industries. She has presented at various international conferences, and her work has been published in edited collections and peer reviewed journals. She is currently working on a project examining the popularity of dubbed Hindi entertainment content among Emirati audiences in the UAE. Today, she will be speaking on The Superstar is Dead, Long Live the Actor, revisiting discourses of Bollywood stardom in the age of OTTs and streaming platforms. Debanjali Roy is an assistant professor in the School of Languages, KIIT, deemed to be university, a doctoral candidate from the Department of English, University of Calcutta, and a former T.S. Sterling Scholar from Presidency University, Kolkata. She received first class grades in both undergraduate and postgraduate courses of studies. Associated with ELT and EFL programs funded by RELO, Ms. Roy has written many scholarly articles in international peer-reviewed prestigious journals and received many professional and academic scholarships from European Union, UK and US Embassy in India. At present, she is co-editing a book published by Apple Academic Press, Taylor and Francis, USA. Today, she will be speaking on OTTs in contemporary India, studying changes in consumer preferences and viewership patterns. Aritra Basu is an assistant professor at the Department of English Center, Center for Distance and Online Education, Robindra Bharati University. He completed his MPhil from the Department of English, University of Delhi, working on the translatability of riddles in Feluda. He has published papers in journals published by Jadavpur University, the University of Calcutta, and Scottish Church College, along with publications in journals like News India and Asian Quarterly. He has presented papers at conferences organized by University of Birmingham, Johns Hopkins University, Lancaster University, and several others. He is also a creative writer and a slam poet, and he enjoys public speaking on both academic and non-academic platforms. Today, he will be speaking on the beginnings of sitcom, a brief overview of sitcoms in and around the turn of millennium. Now, without further delay, we shall start with today's session. Dr. Shreya Mitra, I request you to please present your views on today's topic. Over to you, ma'am. Ma'am, you are on mute.
Sorry about that. Well, let me go ahead and share the PowerPoint. Hopefully, there won't be any tech glitches. Okay, so while I'm just waiting for the PowerPoint to, uh, yes. Is everyone able to see the PowerPoint?
Yes, ma'am, it's visible.
Yes, thanks. So Basically, the focus of my talk today is about OTTs and how they are redefining notions of stardom. The title of my talk, The Superstar is Dead, Long Live the Actor, is actually inspired or rather taken from an article by Shubhra Gupta, who's a film critic and reviewer, who, in an article for Indian Express and way back in 2018, talked about the crisis for, the A-list Hindi film stars. And 2018 was an icon, or rather not such a great year for the three Khans, because they all, they had films which did not perform at all at the box office. And at that point, there was a lot of talk about the content being the king. And this is a period where we also see the rise of actors like Rajkumar Rao and Ayushmann Khurrana. Now, fast forwarding to this year, there has again been a lot of talk about the crisis that the Hindi film industry is facing. Of course, this relates to many other aspects, the rise of the so called pan Indian film like RRR and Bahubali, etc., KGF, but also what, the Hindi film star not having that kind of a draw as before. So where does this fit in with OTT? So one of the reason I think this will also, speak to Debanjali's talk about, because I think she's focusing on OTTs and the sort of the phenomenal rise thanks to the pandemic. And what I'm looking at is post pandemic, when we have the Hindi film back in the theaters and they all seem to be, facing the same fate. What has happened in these past 2 years when we talk about the way stars are perceived? And what role has the OTT plays in this context? So just have a couple of images there and some codes that have been talking about what has happened in the past 2 years. How not only the OTT has exposed the Indian viewer to multiple, viewing experience. So I'm not just talking about, Hindi web series, but web series in other regional languages, as well as whether it's K dramas, whether it's American shows. So we have the concept of being exposed to many different narratives. And when we talk about OTTs, we are also talking about series which are very much what we call prestige drama. They are not, cutting back on the money. It's the same as, what a decent film would be. But again, how does it all relate to stardom? Now, another thing, and I'm sure Debanjali will weigh in more, is what has happened in the last 2 years, the role of the streaming platforms, and especially in sort of the post pandemic scenario, where it has not only sort of re signified the Indian audience's expectation of what good content is, but also who is the star. Now, I'm going to kind of go back a couple of years to 2018. This was pre pandemic, but that's a hoarding for Sacred Games. Now, Sacred Games, we all know, is one of the early, like it was Netflix's, big prestige drama. It had Saif Ali Khan, a A-list Bollywood star, and, based on a best-selling book. So what better way to, Netflix, sort of, announce it's like, okay, we are on top of the game. But also, what happens with Sacred Games is Nawazuddin Siddiqui, the overnight superstardom of him. Of course, we all know him from Gangs of Wasseypur, but the way, the kind of exposure in terms of audience eyeballs that he gets via Sacred Games, one almost at times, I won't say forgets, but it no longer is about Saif Ali Khan, being the protagonist. It's also about Nawazuddin Siddiqui's character. And he's not the only so called, you can say, alternative actor who finds fame via OTT. You have Jaideep Ahlawat, you have Pankaj Tripathi, and many of these actors have been around for a really long time. But it's thanks to OTT that they truly, you can say, taste fame. And this is what I call has, the rise of the actor hyphen star. The concept of that you could be the sort of the main protagonist in some of the shows, and you don't need to be a A-list or even sort of, a well-known star. And here is where we talk about how OTT has changed how we look at actors, like who makes a OTT star. And one of the, again, an interesting case study, I think, is Shefali Shah. Of course, keeping in mind the time, I'm not going into too much detail, but she's recently, we've had Darlings, which was also the maiden, sort of debut of Alia Bhatt on OTT platform. But also we've had the second season of Delhi Crimes. Sometime back, it was Humans on Hotstar. So she's obviously one of sort of the big, OTT stars. But Shefali Shah's been around for a really, really long time. I mean, she was Akshay Kumar's mother in a film that was, directed by her husband. And at that point, of course, she made, we all know her from Satya. But prior to OTTs, we never really talked about her as the breakout star. The kind of stardom she has today is only, I would say, not only primarily, but, purely courtesy the OTT platform. Because the kind of narratives that she's essaying the main role is, again, we go back to that, are these kind of narratives possible in a sort of a theatrical or Hindi film scenario? Obviously not. Now, another point I want to kind of underline is the role of OTTs that have played in, one can say, reviving some of these the careers of Bollywood stars, but who kind of has been, or who've been relegated to their shelf life, especially female stars. We all know Sushmita Sen and post Arya. I mean, Arya had again amazingly second season, both critical acclaim as well as viewership. And she's again a female actress who was not considered viable in terms of Bollywood, whether the age, her track record. But when it comes to OTT, there she is. She's the main, protagonist in shows. And it's not just Sushmita Sen. We have someone like Bobby Deol, or even you can say kind of minor stars where who've kind of come in a more proactive, or rather a much more main role, thanks to the OTT. So here is where we talk about the OTT giving almost a second lease of life. And I'm in some ways reminded of KBC and Amitabh Bachchan and the role television played at that point also. Like once Bachchan was on KBC in 2000, it legitimized television. So whether it was Govinda, Shah Rukh Khan, even Anupam Kher, everyone wanted to jump onto the bandwagon. And the same thing, we kind of see it on, OTT, whether it's Bobby Deol, whether it's Sushmita Sen, or even someone like Abhishek Bachchan. I mean, here we see the Amazon Prime Into the Shadows, but also we see not just series, but films that have gone, thanks to the pandemic, straight to the OTT platform. Like that's we. Again, something that, no theatrical release, straight to OTT, and that made perfect sense for the filmmakers. One thing that, again, I'm not getting into too much detail, but I want to highlight is the role that OTT plays for the female star. And I'm not just talking about someone like Shefali Shah, who's kind of never really got the kind of roles that she's getting now earlier, but even A-list female stars who are no longer considered a viable option for a film. I'm talking about, Karishma Kapoor, Ravina Tandon. Of course, they were there visible. They are there on social media. They're there at the judges in all these talent contests, but we never really saw them in films. For example, a great example, Madhuri Dixit. She's tried, of course, made films as comeback, whether it was Gulab Gang, whether it's, Date Ishqiya, but the kind of traction that Fame Game provided her was, obviously, we don't see it with her film roles. And Fame Game is very interesting because it's almost this tongue-in-cheek reference to her own stardom. She's an A-list star who's playing an A-list star, and she addresses the issues of ageism. How once, beyond a certain age, I mean, you can have a Akshay Kumar being paired with a heroine who's almost 30 years his junior, and Samrat Prithviraj. But obviously, that kind of scenario is just not possible for the female stars. Forget about being paired with a younger male actor, but even someone who's a contemporary. So you do have OTT almost, giving, I wouldn't say not even second lease of life, but providing a platform that was not possible earlier, especially for female stars. So there's a lot of talk about how the OTTs, I mean, Vidya Balan, Shefali Shah, you have Pooja Bhatt, and there's, a lot of discussion about how OTT has made something that for mainstream Bollywood was out of the question. And I hope I'm doing fine with the time to kind of, come back full circle. I did mention about how, more than 2 decades back, Amitabh Bachchan has almost legitimized the move to television with KBC. And what we see happening in OTT is, of course, the Bollywood A-list star also jumping onto the bandwagon. Now, the screenshot that you see there with Akshay Kumar on literally on fire, that was a promo for Amazon Prime. This was way, way back in 2019. And then, of course, COVID happened. So things were on the back burner. But very recently, he's made his debut, not on Amazon Prime, but on Hotstar with Katputle, which unfortunately seems to be going the same fate as his recent releases. Hasn't got a great reviews, but here you have an A-list star who's on, the OTT platform. And of course, there is Ajay Devgan, who kind of made his debut sometime back, and Rudra. And Rudra is, of course, the remake of the Idris Alba Luther. So you have a prestige drama remade as a prestige drama for Hotstar, and that's perfectly fine for the Bollywood star to kind of lend his presence. We have Shahid Kapoor, who's about to make his presence felt very soon on the OTT platform. So OTT is no longer seen as sort of a getaway for actors who never really got the chance to play their role. In fact, I would say OTTs redefined Hindi film stardom in many different ways. You have the rise of stars like, what I call the actor star, like Nawazuddin Siddiqui, Jaideep Pahlavat, Pankaj Tripathi, and also Shefali Shah. Then also giving kind of, an opportunity for these A-list female heroines who were not considered, feasible for film roles. And now it has become another platform, a venue for the A-list male star to kind of, one can say, leverage their role as a transmedia star. Because if we look back, let's say 25 years back, a film star was a film star. And now, if you look at the film star, the Bollywood star, he's no longer just kind of circumscribed by the cinema. Look at Salman Khan. There's Big Boss, right? Then you have endorsements. You have, of course, social media, and now you have OTTs. And to just wrap up, this is the last slide. This was a comment made by Nawazuddin Siddiqui sometime in March. Of course, he later said that he was quoted out of context and he didn't see it, blah, blah, blah. But he seemed to be very disappointed what's happening with OTT. He's like, that was our space. And by our space, he meant, these actors who obviously, didn't have much role in Bollywood. And now what's happening? The stars are hijacking OTTs again. And what he was talking about complaining is, look what it's doing to the OTT content, because it's dumbing down the OTT content. So you no longer have the Sacred Games or Mirzapur or Patalo, but you have something like Katputli, where kind of the baggage of the star is weighing down and OTTs can't really be that experimental. Okay, so that was sort of in a crux my take on OTTs and how they are redefining notions of startup, especially when we talk about contemporary Hindi film. And I would love for both Aritra and Debanjali, to kind of, chime in later. Thanks. Thank you.
Thank you so much for this talk, ma'am. It was very engaging, especially the presentation. It basically questioned the idea of stardom and how the A-listers, Bollywood stars, are trying to make space within the OTT platform. Now, it was very engaging. I now request Professor Debanjali Roy to please share her views on the topic. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you so much, Shramana and Dr. Mitra. That was a really, really good presentation. And you were right when you said that, since the topics that we have chosen to speak tonight, there will be portions which will overlap, but I was really fascinated by the way you presented. Because the time is limited and, the way you did it. Okay, so at the very onset, I can convey my gratitude to the organizers for considering me tonight. And I would be speaking about OTTs in contemporary India, studying changes in consumer preferences and viewership patterns, where my focus is specifically in examining the changing patterns of media consumption in what I call the OTT age, and simultaneously the role of the global pandemic in accentuating the change which was ushered in, by the digital media, by the rapid proliferation of digital media. Now, OTTs, or over-the-top media services, are digital media streaming platforms which are rapidly transforming the scenario of visual media transmission, and subsequently they are replacing the traditional media consumption patterns. Now, in the last few years, there has been a radical growth in the OTT users, and as Dr. Mitra was already, sharing during her presentation, how shows like how adaptation of text, like the sacred games, it became a rage because it was screened, because it was broadcast in OTT. So we find that this growth in the OTT users have been exponential worldwide, and quite noticeable in a country like India, where digital penetration is still unequal. Now, this is a point which I would like to stress on, because when we talk about India as a nation which is which is marked by economic and digital divide, as per some studies which were conducted in the years 2019 and 2020, especially during the COVID time, the COVID pandemic time as well, we find that the online video or media consumption, it has increased. And what I'm trying to point out here is that as online video consumption is, or let's say media consumption is reliant on the availability of devices, on the availability of internet, and of course, when I speak about devices, that means devices that are compatible with online viewing. So factors like affordable internet charges and broadband, it becomes one of the major factors that needs to be considered. Now, in fact, according to a Boston Consulting Group and CII report, average digital video consumption in India witnessed a twofold growth in the last 2 years, owing to the proliferation of diverse content through OTTs. Now, this statement brings to light the curious relationship that exists between consumption patterns and commodity. Now, it's not simply because of digital boom that OTTs have become so popular. It's also because there is a steady increase in the viewership of media content in OTTs that is contributing to the digital demand. Now, true it is that the hallmark of the OTT boom is its convenient navigability, the ease with which media content reaches the audience, basically de-hierarchizing the traditional route of the channel distributors, then the theater runners, etc. The one-click solution, and the convenience of space and time. The point remains that despite the convenience of space and time, where the concept of media consumption in maybe a mobile screen, a way home from university or office, in public transport, destabilizes the very ethos of watching movie in a theater. But despite the convenient navigability and the ease of consumption, that is, the ease of space and time, let's say the active agency of the consumer in controlling the mode in which the consumer consumes the commodity, the major cause, or I should say the defining attribute of OTT, as as in my opinion, is the content that is streamed through it. Just a while ago, Dr. Mitra was talking about the rise of the rise of the artist, and which kind of destabilizes the hero culture, something that the Hindi film industry associates with the Khandan, or the Khan industry, if I may. So the Bollywood A-listers, and going to watch a movie which stars these A-listers, that is somewhere destabilized by the by these rapid rise of the OTT platforms. So my agenda, I would be trying to focus on the content, and interestingly, when I talk about the content, the first thing that we have to keep in mind is that till now, the contents are not censored. And OTTs, besides streaming uncensored content, which of course leaves open a lot of debates, but yeah, then again, so as the contents are not censored and the OTTs stream a lot of global content, it creates or attempts to create a site of desire, I might say, where the audience is encouraged to expect something different from the contents which are usually televised or created for mass consumption. So maybe when I am looking at a promo for a web series that is going to be aired in Netflix, I have a certain expectation from it. And this expectation is generated by the content creators, keeping in mind that it's a very deliberate attempt to create that expectation in the mind of the audience. Um, well, this is an emergent culture, especially in the Indian context. So this emergent culture of consuming media that respects the heterogeneity of consumption, it's one that poses as a challenge to the dominance of the mass homogenization, which is offered by, let's say, the television or even the films which are created. Now, the rapidly growing and evolving content of these OTTs, or the content of the media which is streamed through these OTTs, they evolve as per the tastes of the audience. And in doing so, a moment ago, I used the term that OTTs are, they are creating a brand of emergent culture. So as taking from Raymond Williams once again, that means that OTTs have the potential of being the dominant cultural trait, sometime pretty soon. Coming to the role of the global pandemic in this changing viewership pattern, in this changing demand for consumption, I would share a small anecdote. Well, most of us, probably my co-panelists and those who are watching this, you might have watched the series, the sci-fi web series Dark, which was aired in Netflix a while ago. Now, it would not have been possible had without, let's say, without OTT. It was because it was streamed through internet device, and because otherwise, in order to watch maybe a quality German documentary or a movie or a German sci-fi film, I would have had to maybe wait for a film festival, or try some other sources, which would have been very complicated. But the ease with which I could access that quality material, that that web series, which went on to become one of the greatest sci-fi web series in that year. Now, when I say this, that the ease with which the content is reaching the consumer, that kind of marks, or that bears the hallmark of the audience expectation, or let's say the consumer's expectation from the content. And that is very deliberate. In my opinion, it's very deliberate. And because the content creators, they wish to create that desire which I was talking about, and in that, OTTs, it transcends from being simply a let's say, streaming device, and transcends to be a site which once again controls and mediates all the collective desires. Now, Adorno had said that all mass culture under monopoly is identical, but with its strategic content placement, OTTs are destabilizing that monopoly. But the question remains whether, by destabilizing this monopoly culture, which is perpetuated by the television industry, or let's say the film industry, are the OTTs creating an alternate hierarchy of its own. So the question remains, and it's too early. It's way too early to make a definitive to pass a definitive statement about it. But yeah, only time can tell. And I believe, Shramana, may I just take one more minute to talk about the impact of global pandemic on this?
Yes, ma'am.
Shramana,
Please go ahead. Yes, ma'am. Please
okay.
go ahead.
One of the major changes that happened in the viewership, in the audience, was they could not access the theaters. They could not go to the movie halls to watch a movie. So their physical space being limited, or their movement being restricted to their household, so naturally the theater space was reduced to the space which was offered, the mobile screen. So the mobile screen became a replacement, which once again has the potential, as I was saying, it has the potential of destabilizing the entire ethos of movie going. So movie going is almost ritualistic. You book a ticket, and the adjoining things, and then you go and watch a movie. It's an experience. But OTTs somehow destabilize that. And that has got a lot to speak about, the future trends in viewership patterns, or let's say the audience preferences. And of course, COVID-19, the global pandemic, it has, kind of started, it has kind of initiated the process, which was kind of long overdue. So thank you. I would end here.
Thank you so much, ma'am. I really loved the flow of your presentation. It was very lucid, like how you started with talking about India being a third world country, and also OTT being a privileged thing, that only privileged people they have access to it. And then you went on to talk about how the digital demand, it has also created a desire, that what you called about the emergence culture. It has caused a desire, like within the people, the kind of the way in which globalization has also aided to it. So it was very illuminating. Thank you, ma'am. I request Professor Aritra Basu, sir, please kindly share your thoughts on the topic.
Hello, good evening to the organizers. I would like to begin by stating that Dr. Mitra and Professor Debanjali Roy, they have taken this discussion to a whole new level altogether, and I highly doubt whether I'll be able to contribute anything significant after this. My topic for today is the rise of sitcoms, but my talk won't be as academic as the two talks which preceded me. I will start with a question which I will then answer myself. Has it ever occurred to you, why exactly do sitcoms, or most OTT shows or TV shows for that matter, come to us in an episodic structure? Why exactly is it that we as consumers are often made to understand that we will consume, say, 22 minutes worth of one episode for 236, that being the number of episodes in Friends, that comes around 50,000 minutes. Now just imagine, I have done the math in my head. I might have made a mistake, but I think it comes close to 50,000. What I'm trying to tell here is that when you are simply given to understand that if we are allowed to, let me just do the math, because no, I'm sorry, it's 5,000. I made a mistake there. It's 5,632 minutes. So if I tell you that you have to watch 5,600 minutes worth of content, of course I'm pretty sure everyone will say, no, that's too much. But when I tell you you have to watch 236 episodes of 22 minutes each, I'm sure more than a billion people will say yes, because more than a billion people have said yes to this, and they have made this show, Friends, one of the most, if not the most watched TV show on the face of this planet. So, what exactly is there in this structure? It begins with an assumption that as viewers, we are having a crisis in our attention span. We are not able to look at something for more than 2 hours, or 2.5 hours, or 3 hours. So, if I have a really lengthy narrative to pitch, I cannot provide it in a single sitting. I have to provide them an opportunity to take pauses in between. Now, taking a cue from the two presentations which preceded me, I will like to introduce a new anecdote here. Every OTT allows for a pause and then restart it from the moment you paused. So, why exactly are the episodes broken down? You can pause it yourself. Why do the creators tell us where exactly we have to make a break, and where exactly will the next episode begin? If you go back, say, 250 years in the 18th century, you will see that this is exactly how the novel began. More so in the 19th century, in the Victorian time period, we see novels of Dickens, Hardy, Thackeray being published serially. In the 20th century in Bengal, we see Feluda novels or Shei Shomoy, Prothom Alo, all are getting published serially in magazines like Anandamala, Desh, or whatever, Sandesh, whatever other magazine you would have. The reason is not only to ensure that the audience stays with us for a longer period of time, it's also to ensure that they stay with us till the end. Even to this day, I see a serial novel being published every Sunday in Robibashorio in Anandabazar. That novel gets over in about a year or more, or maybe sometimes it takes even more. So, when it comes to a TV show or an OTT show, this structure was inspired by the structure of the novel, which is what makes the TV show such an interesting aspect to take a look at. Let us take a look at a very interesting aspect. We know that in TV shows there are many types of opportunities which develop. In 1990s, America saw a sudden and massive rise in the production and consumption of TV serials. Mitchell Stephens in History of Television argues by the late 1990s, the typical American spends from 2.5 to almost 5 hours a day watching television. It is significant not only that this time is being spent with television, but that it is not being spent engaging in other activities such as reading or going out or socializing. One of the reasons why it developed an almost unassailable edge against cinema was its duration. It has often been argued that with the advent of technology has reduced our attention span, something which I have already told you. But here in the realm of sitcoms, there is something very important for us to consider. There are two standard lengths of an episode. One is the 20 to 25 minutes episode, generally for sitcoms, and the 50 to almost 1 hour episode for fantasy, legal drama, mysteries, and so on. Comedies last for almost half the time as serious episodes. The number of episodes of these two types of serials also corroborate the hypothesis that our attention span is decreasing. Starting from the third season of Seinfeld to the latest addition in the genre of sitcom Brooklyn Nine-Nine, all have between 18 to 24 episodes, with the notable exception of The Good Place, which has an average of 13 episodes per season, while the serials of fantasy, drama, or adventure, like Game of Thrones or Suits, have an average of 5 to 13 episodes per season. Like any good adaptation, the TV serial took many of the appealing elements of one of the most other inclusive genres, the novel, and added its unique touch to it. The screen and the possibility to add digital, visual, and special effects through it allows the TV serial to supersede its parent genre in terms of reach, interaction, and most importantly, inclusivity. One of the most common points of view used by the novel, the third person narrative or the omniscient perspective, for example, has been adapted by the popular television serial, both commercially successful and critically acclaimed, to the extent that most of them have been narrated using these techniques. For example, Friends, Game of Thrones, Breaking Bad, The Big Bang Theory, Suits, Rick and Morty, and even the first Indian serial on Netflix, Sacred Games, which ma'am talked about, all are narrated from a third person point of view. This takes us to a different discussion altogether, that how do sitcoms develop from one sitcom to the other. I will take the example of Friends and How I Met Your Mother to show you a very important and interesting anecdote. As far as establishing stereotypes go, Friends had established a few, most of which have been religiously followed by How I Met Your Mother, and another sitcom, The Big Bang Theory, which, according to an article in Entertainment Theory, with the production of its 276th episode, has officially claimed the title of the longest running multi-camera sitcom. The first stereotype is that of the womanizer, established by Joey Tribbiani in his classic dialogue, "How you doing?" This stereotype found a complete makeover in the hands of Carter Bays and Craig Thomas as the character of Barney Stinson, and in the character of the failed womanizer Howard Wolowitz in The Big Bang Theory. The geek was established by the paleontologist Dr. Ross Geller, who would not shut up about dinosaurs, continued by Ted Mosby, the architect, and finally perfected by the man with an eidetic memory and no emotions, Sheldon Cooper in The Big Bang Theory. The iconic character of Chandler Bing, initially an introvert who used humor as a defense mechanism to deal with his estrangement issues, was so well etched out by the creators, along with some contribution from Matthew Perry, that it was almost impossible to imitate him. How I Met Your Mother tried it with Marshall Erickson, but reversing the commitment phobia. The Big Bang Theory's Rajesh Kuthrapalli could not talk to girls when he was sober for the first few seasons. Among the woman characters, only one stereotype visibly pertained throughout the three shows, that of the newly arrived attractive woman who goes on to become a romantic interest for one or more of the lead characters in Rachel Green, Robin Scherbatsky, and Penny. How am I doing on time? Okay. So with these similarities coming to play, we now understand how exactly sitcoms contribute to the larger realm of taking the genre of TV serials forward. Now, take for example a TV serial which occurred in TV in the 1990s, like Friends. It was telecast between 1994 to 2004. During its time of telecast, it had its fair share of popularity, but after it came to OTTs like Netflix, or for a very brief period of time, it was also there on Amazon Prime. It was then that we successfully managed to get a Friends reunion, which happened last year. Some of you might be aware of that. This Friends reunion was made possible exclusively through OTTs because of the pressure created on these characters to come to a reunion, and of course they were paid a big fat royalty check as well. To the extent where Jennifer Aniston opened an Instagram account only for the sole purpose of subtly announcing this reunion, and then of course it was followed by subsequent official announcements. These characteristics of sitcoms, whether they be on a television show or on an OTT platform, lead us to understand one thing and ask a question, namely, how exactly is it possible for us to understand sitcom as a genre of text, how we can go ahead to read it, how we can analyze it structurally, and how exactly are examples like these contributing to our understanding of development of TV shows and OTTs. Shramana, do I have any time left?
Yes, sir, you can continue, sir.
For how much? How much time do
Sir,
I have?
another 2 to 3 minutes.
Thank you. Okay, so thank you, Shramana. Let's come to the point of another very important element then, since we have some time now on our hands. Take the example of what happened in the penultimate season of Friends. They ran out of ideas and they wanted to pitch Joey and Rachel together. The audience did not like it, and then they had to go back to putting Rachel back together with Ross. Even in OTTs, it often so happens that the audience gets to portray what they want upon the creators. So that brings us to a question as to who exactly is the author in a TV show or a sitcom, which is the question I would be leaving this conversation with. Is it the writer of the book? For example, if we take an example of something beyond a sitcom like Game of Thrones, which was adapted from a book, is it the director of a particular episode? Is it the executive producers like Kevin S. Bright, Marta Kaufman, and David Crane for Friends? Or is it the reception of that particular show? Many of us know that these Indian TV shows take a lot of time to come up with a second season, like Panchayat. Some of you might be aware, all of you might be aware of that. Panchayat took a lot of time to come back in its second season. Kota Factory took a lot of time to come back to its second season. Mirzapur took a lot of time. So did Sacred Games. All of these were very popular in its first season. But the point remains is that when such a transition happens, or when a TV show is ongoing and the audience is not on board with something, do the creators change that particular angle just to keep the show running? We see that a brilliant show like Mindhunter gets cancelled simply because not enough people watch it. We see a recently established, very brilliant show, Sandman, not getting a second season, probably because of not having enough shows. And then we see a TV show like Big Bang Theory going on for 12 long seasons, where the primary protagonist, Jim Parsons, wanted to leave the show behind on many occasions. Though later he also joined the spin-off Young Sheldon, but he wanted to leave Big Bang Theory behind for many years. So, what exactly determines how long a show will run? Who determines when a show will end? For example, when Game of Thrones ended, not many of us were happy with it, but when Friends ended, I'm sure almost all of us were happy with it. Similarly, when How I Met Your Mother ended, the ending was a bit loose. They killed off Tracy and they ended up mixing Robin with Ted. Not many people liked it. So, my question, which I would like to leave you with, is that who decides what happens next in a TV show? When you shoot a movie, that opportunity is not there. You shoot it, you edit it, you put it out for the public, and then you can't do anything. The most you can do is release a sequel or a prequel. But when you're doing a TV show, you are seeing that a particular type of thing is being accepted well, or a particular type of thing is not being accepted well. You have the opportunity to change it. If you change it, then are you taking the consideration of the audience into the plot of the structure of the TV show too much, or is it the right amount which needs to be incorporated in order for the sitcom to go on for a subsequent amount of time? These questions bother us for a very long period of time, and that is what I would like to end with. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. It was a marvelous talk. I really enjoyed it, like especially how you tried to draw this parallelism between a novel structure and the episodic structure, and you also talked about the psychology of the audience and also how the audience have this power to stir or to drive a sitcom. And with the question that you ended this talk, that who is the author of the TV show, I think that it is very relevant and it is also very debatable. So we shall now begin with the Q&A session. My first question is to Dr. Shreya Mitra. Ma'am, in India, OTT services are becoming the new television. How are the evolving narratives of Indian youth being framed by the content flowing on these international platforms?
Shramana, that was a very interesting question. And let me just kind of, chime in to say that when we think about OTT versus television, I feel in the narrative, there's a very, clear distinction that is happening. Because TV is kind of now seen as something that's more of a mass media. We talk about the lowest common denominator. And OTT content receives more of has a prestige value, whether it's because the content is edgy or the kind of actors who they are. And that's why when we see what's really popular on television, it's either the Balaji shows, or you talk about, the talent contest, whether it's the children dancing or singing contest or something else. So, coming back to your question, talking about, uh, we have to first keep in mind that OTT content is not what we see on TV. Like the television content and OTT content kind of doesn't really inhabit the same universe. There might be overlap, but there is a distinction. And coming back to again the OTT, it's like, who is the audience? And there is more than, of course, one OTT platform in India today. So we come back to the question is like, how is the Netflix audience different? And I go back to Debanjali's point here when she talked about, like the OTT penetration. No matter, everyone loves OTT now, but what about the penetration? Does everyone in India or even urban India, let's forget about the second tier, villages, do they have access to OTT? Sometime back, there was a lot of talk about how Netflix really didn't do well in India as they had anticipated. And one of the factors was like they had put themselves like, not only like we do edgy stuff, but they were the most expensive. And they didn't have things like cricket that you see with some other OTTs, right? Yeah, Hotstar, right? So it's like Netflix might be a global giant, but when you come here and be like, you know what, India is this huge country and we're gonna make a lot of money here, you forget that not everyone will be accessing Netflix. Not everyone is into dubbed, Scandinavian shows about, all these, Swedish Scandinavian crime noir. They're not into it. And so it's like we have to think about when you talk about the shows about the youth, it's like on which platform. Like when we have a show like Ashram, it's on a different OTT platform than, let's say, something like Sacred Games. Or even when we have Panchayat, you have now it's like the gosh, I'm completely forget blanking out the name, but season 2 is going to come. It's with J, and I'm completely blanking out on the name.
Jamtara.
Sorry.
Jamtara.
Yes, absolutely. Okay. So it's like the season 2, they are kind of, doing the promos now. So we have to keep in mind is that which platform are we talking about and who is the audience it's trying to, cater to. Because the Netflix OTT audience is very different from, let's say, I'm not even talking about Hotstar or Prime, but let's say Voot, or when you have Alt Balaji. Like different OTTs have kind of, they uh, market themselves in a different kind of niche, and that's where I think we also have to think about the content. What kind of content is on Alt Balaji versus what kind of content is on Netflix? A lot of time, maybe not so much now, but a lot of the early content in OTT platforms like Netflix was about the hinterlands. Like we had the Wild Wild West. Here it's the Wild Wild, whether it's UP or Bihar, that kind of, that's where you have the Patalok, Mirzapur. So it's almost like putting a part of India on display, not only for international audience, but the urban audience, or at the urban audience. So when you are talking about the youth who live in rural areas like Jamtara, and sort of the let's get quick, rich, it's who are you basically displaying that content to? So, Shramana, coming back to your question, I think when we look at what kind of, programs on youth that's out there, we have to keep in mind what kind of platform and who's the audience. It's a very different era from the Doordarshan or even the early cable networks of, early 90s, Z. Because if we look at the early 90s and Z, we have shows like Tara and there was all that discussion about how shows like Tara or Saas redefine and, how Indian women were seen, had really strong female protagonists. And prior to that, of course, Doordarshan was free over the air. It was all about numbers, and it wasn't about targeting, you can say, niche audiences. So I don't think there's a clear answer to that question. We sort of have to revisit the concept of who is that, specific show trying to cater to and on which platform it is there. So yeah, that was my 2 cents.
Thank you so much for this answer, ma'am. Like, especially what you said that the different OTT platforms they themselves target demography is very different. So yes, that definitely answers the question. Ma'am, my second question to you is that scholars frequently contrast television fame with movie celebrities, which hinders our comprehension of television popularity, since it assumes that television is inferior to the cinema. So, can situation comedies restrict the artist's capacity to perform outside of their archetypes as they grow older, while simultaneously opening up an infinite number of opportunities for the movie star circulation in a cinema culture?
Again, Shramana, great question. And to answer that, I'm actually going to backtrack and go back to, again, the Doordarshan era. If we look back at DD, and I'm not talking about just, the Ramayana, Ramanand Sagar's Ramayana or B.R. Chopra's Mahabharata, but also that same period witnessed many, you can see the rise of the sitcom on the Indian screen. Many of these were very, like Ye Jo Hai Zindagi. They were all not only very much fashion, and Aritra can chime in later. They were fashion on the sitcom rules, but they also had actors who came from many of them for FTII or NSD background, theater background, and some of these early shows during the 80s and 90s, they were not seen as being inferior. But of course, you would never have a A-list star in any of these shows. Many of these are not just a sitcom, not just comedic sitcom, but I'm talking about serialized narratives like Hum Log, which was based on the Latin American telenovela. In fact, Hum Log, it was the result of very much what we call developmental communication of the 80s. But the concept is like, what's the lesson? That's why you had someone like Ashok Kumar literally summarizing and say, this is the takeaway. So at that point, television, of course, was not seen as, I would say, content wise inferior, but it is not something that a star in his prime would like to go there, because it was seen as not only the small screen, but something much more accessible. I think Debanjali had mentioned how movie going is an experience itself. And if we look back to earlier practices of movie going, you had to stand in the queue, get the ticket, go there, and you had your single screen theaters. It was very different from, watching television on your, small screen. And back in the day, we didn't have those big flat screen. It was literally a small screen. But I think, and I mentioned in my talk, I think with Amitabh Bachchan and KBC, the concept of television stardom as something that was not only looked down upon but could dent your stardom in general, I think that changed. Of course, it did not mean that the star could be in any kind of show. It basically meant that the star was in a position of, you can say, an expert, whether it was KBC, whether, or many of those game shows, or you had talent contests, or later Big Boss, which was, of course, these shows were on cable. But the star kind of, could be on television, because I think the concept of who the star is, and or rather how the star is navigating stardom and also interacting with their fans slash those who are consuming the stardom, I think that had also changed. Because when we look at television, we all think about it's in your home. But what Bachchan did was, instead of being like, oh, it's in your home, so that means your stardom kind of goes down 2 notches, it's like here you make yourself more available to your fan. So what we see here, I would say, is the rise of the star as a transitional celebrity. You had the TV, you had endorsements, and this is also in the 2000. You see the impact of post liberalization India and the rise of the star as a brand. So the concept of like being on TV could dent your stardom, that of course changes. And later on, that doesn't mean that you could just effortlessly navigate. No, someone like Sushant Singh Rajput comes from TV, but once he's in the movies, it's not like he's going back and forth. Right, that never happened. But I think what's really interesting in today's scenario is the distinction between TV and when I say TV, I'm including not only Doordarshan but also the cable networks. But the distinction between that and OTT. Would Alia Bhatt be in a series on, let's say, Colors? I don't think so. Or Star? No. But yeah, she was on Netflix and it was a home production, right? And you saw her on social media, tweeting about it, posting the reels, because being on OTT is okay. It's more than okay, because you are, of course, being able to do narratives that are different. You're reaching out to a more discerning audience. The whole idea of also what a film works is changing. And this is, of course, and Debanjali can chime in regarding this. This is also regarding what pandemic, post pandemic, you don't want to go to the theater to see any film. You want this larger than life spectacle. And what has kind of reinforced this is the success of films like Bahubali and RRR and KGF. So you have Bollywood trying to do something like Shamshera. Now we don't know what's going to happen with Brahmastra, but a lot of films are like, okay, it was in the theater, like something like Badhai Do or Chandigarh Kare Aashiki. They did get theatrical release, but the kind of, I feel, even the promo that happened when they went to OTT, I feel at times even superseded the promotion that happened for the theatrical release. Because it's like the OTT audience is someone who really liked this kind of film. So I think we come back to is like, where do we see the star? If he's a Bollywood star, he can now be on an OTT platform like Netflix. I mean, someone like Vidya Balan is there, right? I don't think I don't see someone like Aishwarya Rai being on OTT, because she still very much kind of puts forward this old fashioned, like larger than life aura of the film star. But yes, I can foresee someone like Deepika Padukone doing OTT, and Gehraiya actually was straight to OTT, right? Gehraiya wasn't a theatrical release. So today, for the Bollywood star, OTT is fine. Of course, depends. Netflix Prime is okay. You don't want to be, a random. You don't want to be an all Balaji. But television, that includes cable, I think is seen as kind of, one level below. So it's like, what kind of, small screen platform are you inhabiting? If it's OTT, it has the prestige value and you want to be part of it, because more people are going to watch your stuff. And you get, I mean, look at what Alia Bhatt did in Darlings. I can't imagine Darlings as a theatrical release. I don't think it would work commercially. And it was, got such a great, rave reviews when it on to OTT, right? Because so the actor, or rather the actor who's, in the Bollywood star, can do narratives that's not possible anymore. I would say it's sort of the post COVID scenario with theatrical releases. So I don't know if that answers the question, but I think again, it's what I call, it's very fragmented and segmented. Like narratives, exhibition venues, the economics, everything I think has become way more fragmented and segmented than it was a couple of years back. And that even applies to, stars. So that was my, bit about stardom and OTT and TV. Yeah.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for answering to this question. And I believe that it somehow also connects to the very first question that I'd asked you, that the stardom and this transgression from one platform to the other, it also kind of depends on the audience that they are targeting. Like theater, OTT, movies, and sitcoms, all of these platforms actually target a very different set of audiences. So thank you, ma'am,
Yes.
for answering to this question. Now, I have some questions for Professor Debanjali. So, ma'am, the term televisual refers to a broad media culture where television's many aspects have influenced and are still influencing axis on which we analyze, engage in, and critique modern media culture. So, in an era where globalization and fusion are redefining the frontiers of television, how can we critically evaluate both the present particulars of the dramatization and the issues that are churned up with new technological advances and philosophy?
Thank you so much for the question, Shramana. I would be answering this in a, I mean, I don't know whether I have a straightforward linear answer to your question. And with that, I would like to, borrow from Dr. Mitra. She posed a very pertinent question whether Alia Bhatt would be, doing making her screen presence in a platform like Voot or maybe like the I'm sorry, Zealt. I mean, that's Balaji Alt. So just as the platform is decided by the actor, it's a very conscious choice, because once again, as I was talking about, the relationship between the commodity and the consumption pattern is very, very curious, and it's something that has to talk about the present culture industry that we have. Now, to answer your question, whether this technological proliferation and the change of meaning, or let's say not only the change of dimension, but I would say the change of meaning of televisual culture. So OTTs have radically transformed, a section of the society. Because when we say that, when a certain content is released in Netflix, then the dynamics run, the dynamics is very palpable. Let's say the audience knows, or the content creators know as to who are the subscribers of Netflix. The content creators are also very aware of the product placement, if I may use the term. So this deliberate act of product placement also in turn, simultaneously generates a subset of audience, which I was once again mentioning briefly. So the subset of audience is very different from the one which exists. That doesn't mean that people will stop going to the movie theaters. I mean, despite the technological proliferation, it doesn't really mean that the theaters will stop functioning, at least not at present. Given given the fan base, or given the hit of RRR, of a movie like RRR. So once again, that brings the question: the content. The content is very important, and I mean, I understand that the platform plays a major role, but the choice of the platform streaming a particular content is once again very it is linked with the content that is created and the content that is streamed through that platform. So despite the technological proliferation, I would say that yes, there has been a major impact. It has kind of created an emergent culture of OTT viewers, which I mean, for lack of a better term, I used to call, I prefer to call it an OTT age. We live in an OTT age. And, despite that, I believe that the emergent culture to be a dominant culture, which once again, when I talk about in the Indian context, it's the mass for whom a film is made. Once again, the homogenizing effect of a mass audience. So, well, in my opinion, it will be running parallelly, and whether the OTT culture will be able to finally create its own identity, will be able to forge, let's say, a separate identity of its own as a counterculture. That probably time will be able to tell. Shramana, I hope I have addressed your question.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you so much for answering. And especially, like, I'm really sorry about this noise. There's some something like going on in my neighbor. I'm really sorry about that. But thank you so much for answering the question, ma'am.
That's the culture we are in. That's basically the culture we are in. We talk about culture, and that is, yeah.
Yes, ma'am. So my next question is that how are sitcoms utilized in higher education to foster cultural competence?
How are sitcoms?
Ma'am, how are they utilized in higher education to foster cultural competency?
Shramana, I don't know whether I am the right person to talk about how or whether the sitcoms can be engaged in pedagogy, but OTTs, because I mean, all right. Since we talk about content creation and we talk about media consumption and how those patterns have changed, now when I go to watch a film, it's a I mean it's a given that the audience is passive, the audience lacks that agency. Let's say, I mean, when I talk about the mass produced movies, but when in OTT, with a very well defined demography, with a very let's say well defined viewership, and even if the demography, at least the taste of the audience being well defined, so the audience has a lot more contribution in creating, or in shaping the creation of the content. So whether the sitcoms can be used in classroom pedagogy, probably Aritra, Professor Basu would be in a better position to talk about it. But I can talk about whether sitcoms and OTT, it once again shares a very curious relationship, and something that has been touched by Aritra as well. I mean, when he was talking about the evolution of the viewership, and with such fantastic examples, of course, Friends, some shows run for 12 years, for example, like The Modern Family, and some fantastic shows, they get cancelled. Once again, the creation of cultures, the structures of culture, it also happens through those choices that we make. So yeah, Shramana, that would be my answer.
Thank you so much, ma'am. It was very brilliantly that you answered to the question, like especially because education is actually like young people are so impressionable. Their age is like such an impressionable age. So yes, what you answered, it is actually very relevant to the question that was asked. So my next question is to Professor Aritra Basu. Sir, how has the choice of Indian audiences to consume digital content in their native tongues resulted in a desire for regional content, with streaming platforms and digital producers investing more and more in non-Hindi and non-English language content to appeal to the country's multicultural and ethnically diverse citizenry?
Thank you, Shramana. That is a very good question. First of all, I would like to answer your question with a counter question. Bengali comes up as the third most spoken language in the country. Where is Bengali content in the OTT? We have absolutely nothing except Hoichoi. There is nothing on Amazon Prime, nothing on Netflix, nothing on Hotstar. If you search if you search for Bengali films on Hotstar, you will be shown National Geographic documentaries which have been dubbed in Bangla. There is no Bengali content except a platform which is exclusively Bengali. So, think about other languages. Do we really see a plethora of Marathi films? Do we really see a plethora of Punjabi films? Do we see a plethora of Assamese, Bodo, Odia films? All these languages are not only constitutionally recognized, but also belong to the top 10 languages in India. So when you are talking about non-English and non-Hindi, basically it boils down to three languages: Malayalam, Tamil, and Telugu. And why? Because the South film industry is booming with such great pace. And we see that a film like KGF 2 makes its way onto Amazon Prime. We see RRR coming to Netflix. Of course, there are some shows and films which come to Amazon Prime on Netflix. I'm not saying that they don't come, but there is nothing exclusively on those platforms. And non-Hindi, I don't really think so. Most of the content produced in India is in Hindi. because Hindi happens to be the most spoken language in our country, most of the content produced is in Hindi. Now, for example, if I want to produce something in Bangla, our first constraint would be that of budget. We won't get a good enough producer who would be willing to give us the amount of money that we are willing to put in order to come across a good production of a web series, right? So I remember I came across this brilliant series on YouTube called Birohi. It was absolutely wonderful, but it never made its way even on Hoichoi, leave alone any other platform. And of course, not all content on Hoichoi is equally good. So when you're talking about the evolution of regional content in the vernacular language, OTT platforms take these projects up only when they're sure that people would actually watch it. That is the precise reason why they don't take up, say, a Bengali TV show, right? Why they won't take up an Assamese or a Marathi, they might take up someday, but Bengali they won't. So I think that would partially answer your question.
Thank you so much for answering the question. I think that all of us, being Bengali, we can like definitely very much relate to the answer that you gave us. So my next question is that lately animated comedies have attracted audiences both domestically and abroad. So how can humor determine the degree of individual differences with the help of a more comprehensive view of media selection preferences?
That's also another great question, Shramana. When it comes to animated content, again, the question we are begged to ask in this context is what kind of animated content is shown on OTT? If you see, Netflix recently signed an MOU with Studio Ghibli, where most of its films would now be shown on Netflix. What do we see on Netflix? We see popular shows like Naruto, Death Note, One Piece. We don't see Your Lie in April, right? We don't see, I think there are some episodes of One Punch Man. But when you're talking about animated shows, there are some on Amazon Prime like Kung Fu Panda, I think that qualifies as animation. When you're talking about corroborating animation into mainstream content consumption, the fundamental difference which occurs in the mind of the viewer or the consumer is that of a prejudice, namely that animation doesn't require as much effort as a film or an OTT show does, which of course is erroneous in every possible way, because in my opinion it takes more effort. But the thing is, when you want to pitch even say a semi-academic paper based on exclusively animated content, you will see that orthodox institutions or even say liberal institutions are not very welcoming to you in that context. They will be like, include at least one cinema or one OTT. Of course, there are exceptions in terms of departments of film studies or visual culture, but say in an orthodox department like English, this type of an approach would probably not be acceptable. They would probably tell us to go to the Department of Comparative Literature or Visual Arts or Film Studies. I faced this myself. So the problem here is that we, as say the academics of this world, are not ready to accept animation or animated stuff as text, in the words of Rolla Barthes. So if we, the ones who are supposed to introduce texts to the next generation, are not accepting them as text, how can we expect the masses, all of whom would not have the same level of pedagogical upbringing, to accept animation? So it is we who need to first accept it, and then only can we expect the world around us to be equally accepting to it. Thank you.
Thank you so much for answering the question, sir. So, with this, we now come to the end of today's session. I would once again like to say that we are calling for submissions of stories, essays, and poems. And for the project architecture and submission guidelines, please visit www.tellmeyourstory.biz. I extend a heartfelt thank you to Dr. Sreya Mitra, Professor Debanjali Roy, and Professor Aritra Basu for this wonderful and remarkable session. Thank you so much for joining with us, and we hope that we will collaborate with you in our future projects. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Shramana. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, sir, for the wonderful discussions.
Yes,
Thank you so
thank you again to the organizers for giving us all this platform. And it was really, really illuminating to hear both your talks. And, I was just to kind of, I know we've all been here for quite some, beyond the 1 hour. But something I wanted to mention regarding Aritra's thing about when he mentioned about regional content and how Bengali content, and since we're all Bengali and it's all on Hoichoi. And I was also thinking about during COVID, there was a Malayalam film. It's a superhero film, Minnal Murli. And this was the time I think Netflix was trying to cover the ground, like both in terms of competition from Hotstar and Prime, and also at this point Prime had more regional content, and they really went out all out to promote Minnar Murli. But another thing was that Minnar Murli had a A-list Malayalam star, Tovino Thomas. So it's about, I think, what Aritra said, like what kind of content gets picked. What do they actually push? You'll have a lot of films, whether it's Fahad Fazal or, Mammootty, Mohanlal. But when we come to original series, I think then it's other platforms like Sony Live or Z5 that actually put web series out there rather than Netflix or even Prime. So that was a really good point, Aritra, you had there.
Thank you so much, ma'am, and thank you to Professors Shreya Mitra, Debanjali Roy, and Tell Me Your Story for having me on this platform. It was a wonderful evening. Thank
Same
you.
here.